When Nyla James was born, the rain was falling so hard it sounded like the sky was cracking open. Her grandmother later said it was a sign. This child will arrive through storms. No one laughed because everyone in that room knew storms were not a metaphor. They were a fact of life. Nyla grew up in a neighborhood where buildings leaned tiredly into one another, where sidewalks were cracked like old promises, and where survival was a quiet, daily discipline. Her mother, Renee, worked long hours at a grocery store, her name stitched onto a red apron that never quite came clean. By the time Renee came home each night, her feet ached and her smile was borrowed. But she always kissed Nyla's forehead before taking off her shoes. "You okay, baby?" she asked every night. Nyla always nodded. She learned early that love didn't mean having no problems. It meant not becoming one. As a child, Nyla was observant. She noticed things adults thought she didn't see. She noticed how her mother counted money twice before paying bills, how neighbors lowered their voices when police cars drove by, how teachers spoke more sharply to her than to others, even when she followed the rules. At school, Nyla learned that being a black girl meant being misunderstood before being known. When she laughed too loudly, she was told to settle down. When she asked questions, she was told she was challenging authority. When she was quiet, teachers said she wasn't engaged. There was no correct way to exist, only ways to be corrected. She loved writing. Words felt safer than people. On paper, she could be curious, angry, joyful, afraid, all at once. But when she showed a poem to her teacher once, the woman smiled politely and said, "This is very emotional. Have you tried writing something simpler?" Nyla nodded and folded the paper into her backpack, where it stayed for years. Her hair became another lesson the world insisted on teaching her. In the mirror, Nyla saw coils that reached for the ceiling, curls that refused to lie flat or obey instructions. At school, classmates asked why her hair looked messy or wild. Once, a boy said it looked like she stuck her finger in an outlet. The class laughed. The teacher did nothing. That night, Nyla sat on the bathroom floor while her mother combed through her hair gently, carefully, apologetically. "Your hair is beautiful," Renee said, voice firm. Nyla didn't answer. She wanted to believe it, but believing felt dangerous when the world disagreed so loudly. Her father left when she was 10. Not dramatically, not violently. He just stopped showing up. His calls grew shorter, then less frequent, then non-existent. Nyla pretended she didn't notice, but absence has weight. It presses down on your chest when you least expect it. At school events, grocery stores, random Tuesdays. She learned not to ask questions because unanswered ones hurt more. By middle school, Nyla had learned how to disappear in plain sight. She became responsible, reliable, the girl teachers trusted to pass out papers and keep others in line. She became the helper, the listener, the peacekeeper. People called her mature. What they meant was, She doesn't cause trouble. Inside, Nyla was tired. At 14, she experienced the kind of fear that doesn't scream, it freezes. She was walking home from school when a police car slowed beside her. The officer asked where she was going, why she was out, who she lived with. Nyla answered politely, carefully, like she was taking a test with no right answers. When the car finally drove away, her hands shook so badly she had to sit on a stranger's steps. That night, she wrote for hours. Words poured out like blood from a wound she didn't know how to explain. She didn't tell her mother, not because she didn't trust her, but because she didn't want to add another worry to her shoulders. High school brought new expectations and sharper edges. Guidance counselors suggested practical paths, safe paths, community college, retail work, something realistic, they said kindly. Nyla nodded while quietly applying to programs she was told were reaches. She worked part-time after school, handing over most of her paycheck for groceries and utilities without complaint. She watched her mother age too fast, lines deepening around her eyes, exhaustion settling into her bones. One night, after a long shift, Renee sat at the kitchen table and cried. Just once, quietly. Like she didn't want to be caught being human. Nyla stood in the doorway, heart breaking, realizing something painful and permanent. Children shouldn't have to be this strong, but they often are. College acceptance came in a thin envelope with a scholarship attached. Nyla stared at it for a long time before telling her mother. Renee cried openly this time, holding Nyla like she might disappear. "You're going to leave me," she said softly. "No," Nyla replied. "I'm going to grow." College was everything Nyla dreamed of, and everything she wasn't prepared for. She was surrounded by people who spoke confidently, who had traveled, who had safety nets she could only imagine. Professors spoke about equality as theory. Classmates debated issues Nyla lived daily. She felt invisible and exposed at the same time. In group discussions, she noticed how often her ideas were ignored until repeated by someone else. How often she was asked to explain racism as if it were homework. How often she was praised for being well-spoken, as if that were unexpected. The pressure returned. Be calm, be grateful, don't be angry. During her second year, Nyla broke. It wasn't traumatic. She didn't scream or collapse. She just stopped functioning. She missed classes, stared at walls, felt hollow. Strength, she realized, had a cost, and she had been paying it her whole life. One evening, she sat alone in her dorm room, phone in hand, debating whether to call her mother. The old instinct rose up. Don't worry her. But then another thought followed, quieter, but braver. You deserve help. She called. I'm not okay, Nyla said, voice shaking. On the other end, her mother didn't interrupt, didn't fix, didn't lecture. She just listened. Oh, baby, Renee said finally. I wish you had told me sooner. Therapy was uncomfortable at first. Saying things out loud, made them real. But slowly, Nyla learned that pain didn't shrink when ignored. It grew. She learned that softness was not weakness, that rest was not failure. She joined a Black Women's Circle on campus. For the first time, she didn't have to explain herself. Stories echoed her own. Laughter came easier. Healing felt possible. After graduation, Nyla returned home, not defeated, but grounded. She began working at a community arts program, teaching young girls to write. On the first day, she asked them to describe themselves. One girl said, "I'm loud." Another said, "I cry too much." Another said, "Nothing at all." Nyla smiled gently. "Those aren't flaws," she said. "Those are pieces." One afternoon, a little black girl stayed behind after class. "Miss Nyla," she said, twisting her fingers, "do we have to be strong all the time?" The question hit Nyla like truth always does, clean and heavy. "No," she answered honestly. "We get to be human too." That night, Nyla wrote again, not from pain, but from clarity. She wrote about storms and survival, about girls who learned to bend without breaking, about a world that demanded too much, and women who learned to give themselves grace anyway. She wasn't healed completely. No one ever is, but she was whole. And for the first time, that was enough.